Hello, everyone. My name is Stefan Vincent Lundgren, and I am the Deputy Head of the OECD Center for Educational Research and Innovation, as well as a Senior Analyst. And it's really my pleasure to welcome you all for this webinar on using AI to support student creativity. And we will have a great panelists and we'll learn a lot, and I'm going to introduce them very shortly. This webinar actually marks in advance the International Day on Creativity and Innovation, which happens to be on Easter this year, and so a bank holiday here. And we really have a great cast to actually talk about creativity and also about AI on that. The work that we are going to discuss is actually at the intersection of two of the things that we do at the OECD. Work on creativity. If you have followed us, you know, we have had a big project on how to foster and assess creativity and critical thinking in education. And so basically how to really manage to simultaneously develop these skills as well as the knowledge that all the different subjects are supposed to, you know, give to the students and also pupils. And of course, you know, we have been challenged by the pandemic for this work. And so at that time, we have looked at how technology and digital technology could actually be used to that effect. And of course, now we are hit by the AI or the generative AI revolution. And so, you know, there are new ways also to think about the role both of creativity and critical thinking. But today we're going to focus on creativity. Another work that we do is, you know, the OECD Digital Education Outlook, you know, and so we have a project called Smart Data and Digital Technology in Education, which actually right now really focuses on generative AI and how this is going to change teaching, learning, and the administration of education systems. And so this is also in that context that we are very interested in bringing together these two different topics. For that, we have a great panelist tonight, or this afternoon, sorry. It's a bit like I'm presenting the news. But so we have Todd Lubart, who is really, you know, has been a friend and a critical friend for all these different projects. And he's a professor of psychology at Université Cité and one of the most renowned experts on creativity. We have Kim van Broekhoven at Erasmus University, Rotterdam, who is an assistant professor and doing really very interesting research on creativity and how to use digital tools to foster a creative learning environment and develop the creativity of students. And last but not least, we also have Anil Doshi, who is an assistant professor at the UCL School of Business of Management, and who does a lot of research on that too, and has published recently with a very exciting study very recently on creativity and generative AI. So thank you very much to be with us today and to, you know, just see how we can actually share all the knowledge that you have. And perhaps just, you know, for everyone to get a sense of what you've done and what we know, I'll, you know, just start by asking you to tell us a little bit about the research that you've been doing in that area. And so what are the findings? And let's start with you, Kim.
Yes, thank you, Stefan. Good afternoon, everyone. So my research mostly focuses on equipping students of all ages, so primary, secondary, and higher education, with creative thinking competences via technology-enhanced learning environments. And I investigate the use and effects of generative AI, and then specifically large language models such as ChatGPT, as a supporting tool for creativity in education. And we examine cognitive thinking strategies that students employ when they actually interact with ChatGPT in generating ideas for complex problem-solving tasks. And this is a large-scale study of also for the next coming years. But what we already found in the first study is that students less frequently employ cognitive thinking strategies that really focus on UI, AI, and human and AI interaction. But that most of the ideas that they actually produced in interaction with ChatGPT were mostly repeated from ChatGPT itself. So such a finding might suggest that when students, when they are given the freedom, they could rely heavily on the AI-generated suggestions rather than actively engaging in more complex cognitive processes. So my research also involves really identifying these cognitive strategies and then also implementing instructional support to make sure that students can actually use the strategies and actually work in creativity and not only copying the output of AI. And with colleagues at University of South Australia, we have been working on developing a natural language processing algorithm to detect students' real-time progress through the creative process.
So could you give us one example of these, strategies that help not just to rely on ChatGPT, for example, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So for example, a conceptual combination is often a cognitive strategy that is used to come up with ideas, which you basically combine two concepts, and those concepts could be quite close to each other, which will result in a less novel idea because they're quite known to everyone. But the farther away these concepts are from each other, the more original the idea is likely to be. So conceptual combination is also something that could happen in interaction with the generative AI. So generative AI is able to actually generate ideas or concepts, but to what extent do students actually use a concept given by AI and combine it with their own concepts? And the further away you can see, the more original such an idea or like a product of that interaction could be. So conceptual combination could be one of the many strategies out there. Okay. But we also still trying to identify because there could be more strategies out there as well that we haven't identified yet.
Oh, thank you. So we'll get back to that, but let's move to Anil. And if you had a very interesting study recently and perhaps some other work on that. And so what have you studied and found so far?
Yeah, Stefan, thanks for the question. And thanks very much for inviting me to take part in this exciting panel and tell the OECD organizers as well. So in general, my research is around digital technologies and how individuals and organizations adapt to those technologies. Obviously, with the recent deluge of generative AI, I'm looking at various angles of how individuals and organizations manage the use of generative AI. And so one particular project I think Stefan is referring to was published last year in Science Advances, where we ask about 300 individuals to write a very short story, an 8-sentence story about some topic, say like an adventure on another planet. And we give some of our writers access to either one or up to 5 brief generative AI ideas. So it's an 8-sentence story. We give them a 2 or 3-sentence idea. And the writers can do what they want with those ideas, right? As Kim referred to a minute ago, they can recombine them, they can ignore them, they can adapt them, they can use them word for word, but they still have to write their story. And then we passed those stories on to a separate set of readers or evaluators to assess the creativity of those stories. And what we found was the stories that had access to generative AI ideas were evaluated as being more creative in terms of novelty and usefulness. And not only that, they were also evaluated as being better written, less boring, and having more of a plot twist. So the next thing we did in that study was to look at whether or not, which type of writer accrued the most benefit from the AI ideas. And what we found was the individuals who were inherently the least creative experienced the greatest increase in their creativity measured as evaluated by the third-party readers. So we have some indication that's been kind of corroborated in other research that the benefit accrues most to the least, let's say, inherently creative or low ability or low type individuals. But what we find is that the stories that were written with generative AI ideas all look more like one another. So there's this kind of, individual boost to creativity, especially for those who are not very creative to begin with. But there is this collective convergence in what those stories look like. So we have this kind of trade-off that we observe in our study. I have some other work where we look at not in the context of creativity, but we're looking at how AI can assist with evaluating ideas, evaluating difficult to interpret, difficult to evaluate types of ideas. And another study where we kind of think of what a human and an AI dyad, a human AI partnership looks like in accomplishing tasks, not just creative tasks, but any kind of tasks in the context of generative AI. And I'll probably be drawing on a few of those other studies during the course of the conversation as well.
Thank you. So we actually very interestingly move from, the metacognitive and cognitive processes to the actual output, individual and collective. And so that's actually very good starting point for Todd, so what do you think, Todd?
Okay. Well, thanks for the invitation to be here with everybody. And I'm working with several people in our research group on a few aspects about AI and creativity. And so one thing we did was a kind of conceptual think piece. We called it a manifesto. And together with a lot of authors, including Florent Vanchon, who's in his thesis here, we came up with 4 use cases that could describe different people, but maybe some are more frequent than others. Like you have a use case where you co-create with the AI tools, which is the best case, let's say. Then you got a use case where you just plagiarize what AI did. We call it plagiarism 3.0. Then you got what we call laziness, where you just let AI do it and you say, AI did it. I don't need to be creative anymore. And finally, you got the 100% human, where you say, I'm doing it all alone. I'm not using AI. I'm purist. Okay. And then in other work, we looked at, for example, how can people co-create? What AI tools are the best to use? And how can you introduce an AI system as a teammate, maybe in a group creativity, for example? In some other work, and that work we're doing with Sudapa Chompunach, who's over in Thailand. In some other work, we asked AI to produce products, be creative. And we looked at stories and so forth that it produced. And we had other AIs judge the AI stories and humans too, to see how well AI does in a human task compared to humans. And we did a lot of work on what's produced and is it creative. And this work was done partly with Florent and with Dimitrios Gramenos in Greece. And finally, we also with other people like Janet Raffner and Michael Hansen and Ron Beghetto and all, we're looking into how AI can come into teachers' jobs to help them rethink their lessons and to help them inject AI boosted activities in creativity training sequences they might roll out in a classroom. And the last thing I want to mention is some other work that we're collaborating with the team of Roger Beatty on, where they give AI trained systems a ton of things that humans produce in a task, and they train the system to be a good judge, which means that if a human does something, you can just show it to this AI system, and it acts as if a human judge looks at it very quickly for you, so it gives you feedback. Anyway, that's a quick overview
Thank
of
you,
a
Todd.
lot of stuff because we're collaborating.
So in some ways, we had in Kim's case an example of laziness or plagiarism, and in Anil's of some kind of co-creation, in fact, in terms of but Emily is asking a question that I also had, which is basically what's the difference between being lazy and plagiarizing?
Okay. When you're lazy, you just say, I'm going to let AI do it. And I tell you, AI did it. I don't have to do it anymore. When you plagiarize, you use AI, but you say, I did it.
Ah, But so in terms of cognitive processes, it's kind of the same. It's just the way that you present it.
Well, you outsource. When you're lazy, you just outsource it. You say, I don't have to do creativity anymore. We got a system for that. When you plagiarize, generally, you actually actively use a system, see what it does, more or less use what it gives you, but you might change it a little. It's a much more active thing rather than just outsourcing. The question is to what extent these different profiles, you might get a percentage more of people for one or the other, and probably through education, you can help people adopt a certain profile more than another, you know?
So I'd like to have your, views on, well, given where the research is currently standing, would you say that at this stage AI has more of a potential to support creativity, or actually to lead to more lazy plagiarizing behaviors? And when it does support, what are the some of the good strategies to employ to do that? So who wants to start?
Yeah, I could start here.
Go ahead.
So I personally think that AI is not likely to just take over the creative thinking. I rather think that AI might serve as like this complementary role in the creative process. So it would also depend which stage of the creative process you specifically look at. For example, if we start with problem finding, I would say that's not something we could reasonably expect from the computer, because you also have to tell the computer or AI to actually go to see these problems. And often, especially if my research, I mostly look at complex problem-solving tasks. And there's also a lot of emotions in those kind of tasks. And AI is missing these kind of emotions. So I think that it was always the most important part also from the human aspect, to really have the co-creation there. So the context is important, and AI can lack that context. You basically have to tell AI what the context is. So that's more for problem finding. And I think IG generation, that really depends on creative thinking. So those coming back to those cognitive processes. And there is this debate on authentic or intentional creativity versus like artificial creativity. Because a generative AI might be able to actually conceptually combine concepts. And by coincidence, the output could be labeled as, oh, this is something creative. But the process to actually come up with such a conceptual combination is, again, totally different for humans than for an AI. So I would say in that case, the process, if you look at it, is different and is creative. And it cannot be from an AI point of view. But I think if you look at IG generation, what we could see, and I think that also lines up with the framework that Todd just presented, it could actually speed up or like fasten up the process for students, because it can actually generate a lot of ideas. And normally what you have is that you come up with a lot of ideas, maybe the first 5 minutes, but those ideas are often not the most original or creative ones. So that's in the creativity literature also called the serial order effect. And if you hit the wall that you think, I cannot come up with any more ideas, that's often really the point that you want to go on and actually come up with additional, more novel ideas. So a generative AI could help students in that regard by actually generating a lot of ideas, which you might actually recognize. And that's also what Anil said first. Like, we saw kind of a homogenization with the products or the output of generative AI. But then together, based on that, you might actually come up with novel ideas. So I personally think if it's really about IG generation, we could use generative AI best for that part of the creative process.
Thank you. Who wants to add? Anil?
So I think Kim is on an interesting line of thought here. I would just add a couple of things. I don't necessarily think I'm agreeing or disagreeing with what Kim is saying, but I think kind of one of the ways I think about generative AI is, how does it relate to us as human? And a lot of people will jump and say AI is a tool. So I have some research where we give AI ideas to academic researchers. And you see a lot of those researchers say, I'm not going to take the ideas from AI because it's just a tool. The responsibility of coming up with those ideas is mine as the researcher. And other researchers will say, hey, the idea from that actually validated something I already had, or sparked a new direction for me. And so there's this, I think Kim's right, there's this very emotional or responsive element to how we as humans are just reacting to the tool in the first place. Having said that, I think thinking of it as a tool is oversimplifying it. Maybe thinking of it as a human is also giving it too much credit, at least so far. But it is something of an alien type of formation of, words and ideas. And to the extent that it is forming coherent sentences, and sentences are the representation of ideas, it's not too big of a leap to say that generative AI is already there or very close to being able to synthesize in new problem spaces, right? So I don't think that the idea of it finding problems is too far from its capabilities if it's not there today, right? I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is that the tools are changing in dramatic ways all the time. It's just so hard to keep up with it. At least that's how I feel. I'm constantly overwhelmed. So when I look at the kind of the creativity space that Kim had started talking about, problem finding, idea generation, research, outlining, iteration, and refinement, I see generative AI as acting potentially as a substitute or as a complement across any of those stages. And so I think one of the points that I'm going to harp on probably for the rest of the talk is it's very, very much about how the individual, how the student is using the AI rather than thinking about its capabilities, because it is capable of either complementing the human and putting the human's work at the forefront, as Kim was saying, push the ideas to the human and get them to think of the next interesting idea, or capable of substituting for the human. And whether it's a lazy person or someone plagiarizing, whatever those reasons are, it is capable of acting as a pretty competent substitute in lots of creative tasks.
Thank you. Todd, what is your...
Yeah, well, I follow along with all those ideas that were already suggested there, totally. And in fact, when you say AI tool or AI tools, there's a lot of Gen AI systems out there, a lot more than the ones everyone talks about, like ChatGPT all the time. And many are specialized, and part of, let's say, co-creating with these systems is to find the way to use the best specific tools in your creative process. And so it's not just like turn it on and give it a prompt and get the answers and that's it. We found, for example, that there's a lot to learn on that. And also, there's things that AI can do that can help partly to generate ideas. It can generate lots of stuff, which makes your job as an evaluator of all this stuff a lot more difficult than it used to be. It used to be hard for humans to generate much, so there wasn't too much to evaluate, finally. But now there's a ton of generated stuff, so it's important to evaluate. But AI can help evaluate your ideas, your human ideas, because it compares it to stuff that's out there on internet and all, you see? So there's a lot of different angles here. I mean, when you say people need to learn how to use rather than abuse Gen AI. But I just want to say one other kind of thing we've observed in studies. When you give Gen AI a request to generate ideas, if you give it once, you see what it does, and you say, wow, looks pretty good. Of course, it's sucking off of everything of internet, but compared to an average human, it's not so different from what average humans give because it summarizes what they gave finally. And if you keep asking the Gen AI system to give ideas for the same question and you wipe away its memory of what it did, it starts to give you the same ideas over and over and over. And so this is what leads to kind of what Anil also mentioned about the kind of like homogeneity effect. So we got a new tool, super powerful tool. We got to learn how to use it in a way to make our creativity better, or we can just be kind of lazy and outsource it and get this kind of average creativity coming out of the tool, you see.
So one question I have for you, and perhaps actually for you, Todd, even more, so what we're saying here is that, we have a lot of great tools who can help to co-create and, can be very specialized. And so in some areas are extremely helpful. One thing that is kind of very obvious is, how it is strong for idea generation, for example. But my question on that one is, and especially for those who have studied creativity for a long time, idea generation and, brainstorming, etc., is actually something which is part of the traditional methods of trying to develop creativity and find creative ideas. But I'm wondering if it is a process which is important, or if it is actually to have all these ideas on paper, which actually, of course, ChatGPT or any other large language model can do much more easily than any human being. And I'd like to connect it to a question that we had. And thank you all for all these questions on the chat. There are really too many for us to address them all, but one related to the limits of human cognition in some ways, and saying that, and James in the chat said that, oh no, we have this great tool which we don't have the same limitations, and so thanks to that, it will really unleash our creativity. And my question is, will it unleash it or not? Because in fact, to what extent our creativity relates also to our limits, cognitive limits, and Tim mentioned the emotions. And so that's I start with you, Todd, because that's a difficult one, perhaps.
Well, it will unleash it for some. It will leash it for others. So the question is which group you'll be in, really. And yet again, those who just do the basics, they just know a simple system like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, whatever. They just give it a prompt, whatever, to get whatever. That's the one shot, and they go, let's go with it. It's like kind of sitting around and saying, but let me think of a few ideas alone. I think of 2-3 ideas and I go, hey, I got 2-3 ideas. Not bad. Yeah, bad. Because their first 2-3 ideas are probably not great. Okay. So, this is yet again the whole issue is really there's a huge educational opportunity here to raise up the general population's creativity thanks to learning to use these tools. Or there's a huge opportunity to get even more degraded creativity out there because people just say, well, now AI can do it, so I'm out of business, whatever. And we have to show that humans have a value added beyond what a Gen AI produces. And if you look in studies where people against machines, against AI, generate stuff like stories, you'll see the best stories are by humans still, okay? And the Gen AI ones are pretty good, can be good. Also, you can customize an AI system so it can become your own creative agent.
Actually, that relates to one of the cases in your study, Anil. I remember, that where the group of those who could have used the ideas generated by Gen AI, but who didn't, and who actually, if I remember well, had more diverse outputs and creativity outputs than all the other groups.
Yeah, so I think we had 3 different conditions. In one condition, the writers didn't have access to AI ideas at all. Those ended up being individually evaluated as less creative, but collectively they were more diverse. If you got access to AI ideas, you were evaluated on average as being more creative. Remember, they still have to write the story. They got the AI ideas only. So it is a co-creative process. It's not human versus AI. But those who did get those AI ideas were evaluated as being more creative, but collectively there was a convergence. They were less diverse when compared to one another in the same condition. So, Can I just take off on the question that you posed, Stefan? I don't have a great answer. I just have kind of four principles that I would think of. One is incentives. For example, my wife is a graphic designer. She spent 4 years in secondary school training in art. She spent 4 years in a graphic design program at a top program in the US, 2 years in a master's program. So that's about 10 years of training and education. And if people can imitate her work, 60% is good, 80% is good, some degree of imitation, then the opportunities for designers will decrease and the difficulty in differentiating herself from others will increase. And so incentives becomes a very big question here. How do you incentivize the development of that human capital if the ability to imitate is so high? A second principle is capabilities here. We're talking about things being more or less creative a lot in this conversation, but are we talking about the outputs as being more or less creative or the people as being more or less creative? And I think we have to keep that in mind, that just because you might be even co-creating or using AI in some way, you're losing those repetitions as an individual. So I'm very worried about even what appears to be the individual as being more creative is actually a trade-off for that individual. The third point I would make is sometimes we want a lot of bad ideas, right? We want a lot of ideas so we can see those outliers. And so in certain instances, we do want to have that diversity and we do want to have that kind of unadulterated, uninfluenced set of outputs from a wide variety of people. And the fourth thing I would say is, AI is already more than capable, better than humans at a lot of different tasks. It's not beyond reason to think that it will be able to come up with novel ideas as well as or better than humans, because it can span larger spaces, it can cross different disciplines, it's able to bridge different ideas in ways that humans can't. So this kind of us versus them thing, do we stop investing in being creative ourselves if AI can do it better? I think that's just a very grim prospect.
Thanks, Anil. Actually, listening to you, I was thinking, perhaps actually what humans can do that Gen AI doesn't do is to have these bad ideas. And so I wanted to get back to, Todd's point on what makes us human creative, or what are the things in creativity that we humans can do and that Gen AI or cannot do. And so what would be your suggestions on that, acknowledging that this Gen AI can do a lot of things, not always very well, but can do a lot of things. Kim, do you want to?
Yeah, I think going back, and that also I think adds on what Anil said as well. Do we talk about the product or the process here? And I will be not advocate or actually talking about the process, because often also in creativity research we look at the products, we can judge them creative or not. But the process, what I said earlier, is totally different for humans compared to AI. And also coming back to your point, Stefan, the question, if you really look at the process, I would say that we as humans are authentic. So we act in accordance with desires, we have motives, we have ideas or beliefs that we want to express in our ideas. And we do such a process also intentional, so called it more the intentional creativity. Like we start with the process aiming on creative ideas. When you look at the process from the AI perspective, is more computational process. So it's not mindful, it's not human at all. So I would say on those part, if you really look at the creative process, we differ a lot from AI. And I think in that regard, in the process, we can really use it as a complement and not as a replacement, because it will never be on that. It will never be authentic or like intentional with creative ideas.
Todd, do you want
Yeah,
to?
yeah, totally. The authenticity and intentionality are let's say, the two key things that separate the human from the more machine, let's say. You also they use different processes of research for ideas. So in AI type creativity, the process is kind of statistical of combination and stuff like this and what's rare and so forth. And so you do get junk, by the way. Okay. Don't think everything it does is great. especially if you keep asking it, you get more and more the, let's say, distribution of what AI systems produce. And some of them out there are a bit more performant on creativity than others if you compare the main systems available. But I just wanted to add that this is a really good topic, and how people in different jobs, creative jobs, because it was mentioned designers, this is a creative job, like writers and so forth, how they are looking at musical composers, how they're looking to introduce and integrate AI more or less in their professional creative work is a big domain and impacting a lot all the professional schools. And if the audience is interested, there's a book coming out in a couple weeks, I believe, and it's about AI in the creative process. It's by our colleague Giovanni Corazza, who's editor of this book, with chapters from different domains. And so, anyway, it fits in well with this emerging trend.
Thank you. Anil, do you want to add something? I have then, if not, I have
No, I just wanted to say one small point to kind of complement the discussion here. You know, I agree. I think Kim's point was very interesting, and I'm trying to wrestle with it as we're having the conversation about this idea of emotion and intentionality as being a differentiator. But it's really interesting if you look at kind of, I don't remember where I saw it, but there's this like annual survey about how people are using generative AI. It turns out that in the past year, one of the most rapidly increasing use cases is for emotional support. Right, people going to AI for some kind. Maybe it isn't emotional, but maybe it acts as if it is emotional enough to support us as individuals. And so now people are using generative AI in this very human instance. And so maybe it's not replicating a human's emotionality or a human's intention, but it is acting as if it is. And maybe that is good enough for this kind of creative, inspirational underpinning that we're suggesting is valuable in creative exercises.
There is actually, as you know, this literature on mental health, in medicine, and showing how chatbots for a long time and now generative AI are actually quite effective in supporting people with severe mental health issues, and so that there is some element of nonetheless, feedback, and people can feel less judged and etc. When it is a machine or ask questions that they wouldn't ask the next person. But I wanted to go back to your distinction between output and people, Anil, and try to connect it with one of the things that Todd said, on musical composers, for example. And actually, it's a discussion that which relates to how we humans actually, what we value, as human beings, usually in the creativity. And I would say that we have and a lot of research shows that when people are asked to distinguish between what has been generated by humans or AI, so they often make mistakes. And when they believe that it's a human, they like it, and when they believe it's an AI, they don't like it, and regardless of who has actually produced it in some ways. And I wondered if that connects to, what you were saying on authenticity, and intentionality, and how we relate to fakes, and so because we may actually, I would love a fake Vermeer, especially if I don't know that it's a fake. Like the product. And I'm saying that because, if you think of musical composers and the imitation that you have spoken about, in fact, a lot of the education of musicians, for example, is based on making them write, a kind of symphony movement in the style of Brahms, and none of us would be able to distinguish it from a real Brahms, exactly like the Gen AI, but we've never been interested in these kind of productions and outputs somehow. As if, we want to connect the creative output of some person to, the person who actually had the intention to create it. So what do you think, on that? What do you think that actually what will keep our human creativity, that we actually prefer that it's somehow human? or so should we just not know, have a veil of ignorance on who has actually created, and then we would have a very different kind of appreciation of the output. So
Oof, Stefan, I see you set us up for the big question, and so, over the course of the conversation. So this is a big question, I think, right? We have similar analogs in previous instances, right? So think of furniture, for example. You can imagine a custom or bespoke craftsman, a woodworker providing a bespoke piece of furniture versus mass-produced furniture. And if you think of the market for furniture, it turns out, I think, what's happened is the vast majority of consumption is going to like the cheaper, utilitarian, mass-produced furniture. There still is a market for that custom-produced output, that human output, that human activity. I have a sneaking suspicion we're going to see a lot of the same thing in other markets now that generative AI is available, where you'll see lots of instances and there'll be a very large market for synthetic output. I'll give you one silly example. Sometimes when I work, I like to listen to electronic music with no lyrics. And I would dig around my Apple Music for examples of that. But now I can go into the music making AI software, type in the kind of music I want, and have a good 45 minutes of music. I've taken away from an artist then by not listening to their music. But sometimes that is the level of the output that I desire. But in other instances, as you indicated, if I'm hanging something on the wall, a piece of art, maybe I do want that human element. So I'm actually in the middle of, this is too early to actually discuss, but I'll just mention it. We're looking at launching a study to understand the market implications where you have synthetic and human goods in the same marketplace. So, we're launching that study now. Hopefully we'll have something to say in the next 8 to 12 months.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to say something on that one? If not, I have two other ones, and one actually is from Nancy in Hong Kong, who asked about age considerations and age appropriateness of these different tools. So when is it a good time or from what age is it, or what are the different kind of users that are most appropriate for different ages? And actually, I could extend the question to different levels of proficiency or of creativity. What do you think?
Yeah, we could put this one off. I think I would make also a distinction. For example, my research mostly looks at education. So, for example, if you look at primary education, children are learning and developing the basic cognitive skills. So in that regard, you could argue that AI tools that are used in education should be simple but interactive, and that the emphasis could also be more on like playful learning. So it's really for how we call also the mini C creativity. So they can come up with an idea which might be novel for the child, which might not be novel for an AI tool, obviously. So then rating the creativity from the perspective of an AI with all these vast amount of knowledge would give different kind of results. So it's not per se on the rating there, but more on encouraging children to develop or explore the world around them also in more playfulness kind of way. And in secondary education, you often see the creativity becomes also more domain specific. So then you can think that AI could encourage like creativity in those specific domains. And then ethical issues related to AI, such as like bias or privacy or the implications of relying on AI tools, those kind of topics might also become more emergent on these kind of levels. Together with the University of South Australia, C3L, we have looked at an AI tool specifically in secondary education that works with visual analytics. And children in that AI playground project are asked to construct a Mars rover with Lego bricks, and they're supported by an AI-powered camera. And that camera gives them feedback, encourages messages like "go on," or "you're doing a good job," "you're almost there." And we really saw in that project also by observing those children that by getting all those kind of compliments of AI, they became more enthusiastic throughout the process. So I would say that encouragement always stays, obviously, but then in secondary education become more and more domain specific. And then, for example, if you look at tertiary education, they could always, students are then more developed also the pro-C creativity, so more the professional creativity. So then AI can be used in more complex way. Also what Todd earlier said, for example, if you think about research or like data analysis, or AI is often used for programming languages or helping with programming. So then AI could become a tool for really enhancing those professional skills. So it really depends on the development level which you are in the educational system, I would say.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that actually it can be used at any age, and it really depends on the use and the purpose and the type of tool that you actually use. So that's yes, thank you. We had I don't know if someone wants to supplement on that, but let's try to get another question, because we have one which is more an assessment. And so here I'm talking to 3 university professors, and so how do we actually assess the student work and the creativity of students or pupils in the age of AI, when we know that they may have plagiarized, as Todd mentioned before. So how do we change the types of assessment, perhaps, or assignment that we give, and how do you think we should deal with that if we want them actually to be also co-creators and personally creative?
I can start if folks don't mind. So I think it's a really, really hard question. I think it depends on the subject that you're teaching. I think there's this kind of this double tension here. On the one hand, I teach a class called Strategy and Analytics. I want my students to become comfortable and familiar and adept at using generative AI as a tool, just as they would use Python. But on the other hand, Kim alluded to this a moment ago. You can use it for coding, but then every time you use it for coding, you have to develop the skills to audit its output. But in order to build those skills, you have to learn how to code. And so you have this tension between the promotion of the tool and the promotion of the individual skills themselves, which are sometimes traded off with the use of the tool. So, I don't have a great answer for the resolution of this. What I've done in my class is, again, focus on having the students use it to complement their work. And so if developing Python code is core to their understanding for today's lesson, then they have to produce that code themselves. And maybe they ask the generative AI tool for an audit, a review of that code, rather than producing a first draft of that code themselves. And then, again, another one really small thing I do is I have the students do more of the work in class. So it's just a matter of kind of having them work as teams in the classroom, having them work as individuals in the classroom, knowing that they're doing the work just from an oversight perspective. That's a practical thing that I've changed as well.
Thank you.
Todd? Yeah, I could say a word. I've seen a lot of colleagues moving away from written assignments at home to in-class assignments where you have no technological support. And secondly, I've seen people, including myself, where in fact I give my exam topic or report topic to AI. It produces an output. I give the output to the students and I say, do better than this if you got anything more to say. And then the last thing I've seen people doing is they say, you can use AI, do what you want, do the project as you like, but you got to give me a kind of log of how you worked. What was your process of the making of? And show me, if you use AI, how did you use it? When did you use it? What did it give you? And then what did you do? Whatever. And so I've seen these kind of 3 ways of going, but we can't say that, we can't think that students are not going to all do it. Of course, you got to tell them, if they all do the assignment with AI at home and they all get the same answer in the kind of stuff I teach, that'll be bad for their grades ultimately. You see what I mean? Because the most common answer becomes like, okay, but not great answer.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah, I think, and that adds on what was earlier said as well, it really depends on the learning goals in a specific course. So if that's, for example, we often have this discussion with academic writing. Academic writing, there are concerns that AI might actually take over academic writing. And in such cases, I can imagine then for the exam, for example, that it would take place actually on campus or actually without any technology in there. However, you might also argue that academic writing, AI could actually complement that process as well. But then it becomes really important to have these more formative assessments throughout the process and to really learn how to work together or collaborate with AI for your own academic writing. But then in that case, it would ask a little bit more also from a teacher or student perspective to really look, okay, what is the text produced by the student himself? What is the text produced by AI? And how does that compare or differ from each other? So it also, the whole critical thinking debate comes there. To actually learn students how they can, for example, insert their own text, which is then made by themselves first, but then let AI actually reiterate on that and have like new versions based on that as well. But as a teacher, would like to have some insight into this process to really see how students collaborate with AI and what they learn from this. So even my argument would be, even though the learning goal, for example, is academic writing and there are concerns with that, then I think if you take a more process approach, you can still integrate AI into that as more a collaborative partner. But it changes some of the education that we currently have in how we set it up. And obviously, I think also, in addition to Todd, more transparency. So indeed reporting it, showing it, how have you worked with ChatGPT or generative AI? And it will be interesting to see some new forms of assessment of collaboration with AI. So for example, my course, students have to report when they actually use AI, but I also want to see their interaction of how they have interacted with AI.
So on that practice, we have a question in the chat, which is basically, does it really make a difference to to ask the students to be transparent about their use of AI and to log it, so to kind of deprivatize, this kind of co-work. So have you seen studies on that, or what is your experience in terms of the effect? I can see actually in Todd's response, especially if you want to have also assess the creativity of the student, that if everyone writes the same because of the kind of occurring bias that AI often produces, as Anil has shown in the study, then yes, indeed, you'll have to make the effort. But in terms of the transparency, what difference does it actually make?
So I haven't seen any research on that specific question. Just from my experience, I think it promotes certain desirable behaviors, right? It gets the students engaged in the mode of using generative AI, the way the lecturer, the way the instructor wants. I don't think it precludes the undesirable behaviors, though, right? It's like you can use it to guide your answers here, but then you can still use it to write up the entire answers over here. And so I don't think you can avoid the undesirable behaviors. I think my one big idea, and it may or may not work, is that it's extremely important for the instructor in the classroom, the program that someone is in, the school, and kind of the broader environment to really construct and enforce norms around AI, because the use cases are too broad, and it's too easy to use it in all the ways that we think create trade-offs for the students. And so I don't think there are rules or regulations that can solve that. I think it has to come from norms.
Yeah, and maybe to add on to that, what I see often in my data collection that is running right now, students have a complex problem-solving task and they're free to interact with generative AI. They simply copy the problem and then they ask for ideas. And if you don't limit that, generative AI simply comes with 20 ideas. And I think almost all of our participants, their first reaction is, wow, that's a lot. So I can imagine, that students might also be overwhelmed by all the ideas that are coming from there, that it's coming from generative AI, and that the cognitive load while interacting with ChatGPT or generative AI might increase. And this could also explain why some students become lazy or plagiarize it because it's just simply too much, and they are under the impression, oh, it's a lot, but actually really creative. Well, we can argue whether that's really the case. So in that regards, I think it's really important to also guide that process. For example, for teachers in classrooms to really have like different kind of assignments in which they ask those ideas and then discuss them. Okay, what do you actually thought of those ideas? How many ideas did you generate? And what if you constrain it? So that has more to do with prompt engineering again. Like what will happen if you constrain it to 10 ideas? So you're more specific in your prompt, come up with unique, but only 5 ideas. So to see for the students to experience, if you prompt it differently, what kind of output it gives, I think that becomes essential in current education to really specifically look at that.
Yeah, I would just add in that there's definitely a framing effect. So if you say to students, I want you to do it all by yourself, then they use AI, certainly, and they got to keep it quiet, okay? Kind of plagiarize in a way or hide it. If you say, AI is out there. If you want to use it, but you got to say how you used it. So then it's more like honest, open policy. And I think students need even more training on what is the options of using, abusing, plagiarizing, whatever. Okay. By the way, there's a whole issue because AI is in a way running off of what other humans did previously on internet. Okay. So, it's not like doing it all by itself, really. It's standing on a base that humans made. But finally, there's this whole issue of like teachers too. They got to get up to speed on detecting when AI is doing stuff because ChatGPT and other systems, they have their own little style of sentences. And by the way, if you ask students to make a story, invent a story about a topic, and they come back and their main character is called Ilaria, I can tell you it's 99.9% sure they used a certain AI system that loves that first name. And so, teachers can get more adept at detecting, like, oh, I think you've been using AI and not telling me.
Mm.
I think that's a cat and mouse game, though, right? Because I think students will figure out how to respond to that as well. So I think that's a little bit of a tough, that's a tough activity.
So we're unfortunately already reaching the end of our webinar, but I would like to give you 30 seconds each to, just say what would you want people to remember, in terms of how to use AI to support and develop the creativity in education. Kim,
Go
ahead, Anil.
Sorry, so I think I was close by first of all thanking you again for letting me take part in the panel. I apologize for jumping on the final answer here, but I think my last takeaway would just be kind of to summarize, to think about who the student is using the generative AI, or at what stage they are, what experience they are, what is their ability, at what stage in the task is something being used. Obviously, there's different stages to every task, and how is generative AI being brought to bear? Is it being brought to bear as a complement or a substitute? And is the goal to deliver on some output, or is the goal to improve the development of the individual? And I think these will create a map for valuable and harmful use cases of generative AI in learning in general, but in creative outputs as well.
Thank you.
Yes. I also really want to thank the organization, OECD, and all the people here listening up for this amazing discussion. And I have the feeling we could just continue our conversation for many, many more hours. But thank you for being on the schedule, Stefan. I think in general, like there are many different kind of generative AI tools that have amazing potential also for education, but also professional life. And what I liked here that we had a discussion product process, and would always say, okay, this process becomes more and more important also from human creativity. And then also, how do students use it? So really the cognitive thinking processes that might lead to a creative product, but this more focus on process-oriented assessment, I think in education is really important, with the transparency there, taking into account that students are basically also trained in some kind of AI literacy, both from the student and from the teacher's perspective. So I think great work has been done and is currently written for the future as well. And I'm looking forward to reading more and examining this topic more and more.
Thank you.
Okay. I just say that, one of the keys to creativity is doing it your own personal way, idiosyncratic way. If you're just going to use AI like everybody else and get the same 20 ideas from AI and everything else, you're going to get into trouble quickly and go down the wrong path, not the creative path finally. So I think AI presents a great opportunity to co-create, to boost your creativity in a new way, in your own special way to use it. And uh, and so it's certainly going to be a big topic for another quite a while until who knows what happens to replace AI and humans.
Thank you to the three of you, and thank you for the wonderful audience. And stay posted. We'll have more webinars, but also actually this is one topic that will come back as part of some reports we're going to have out. The next digital education outlook, as I have mentioned, will be on generative AI. So a lot of these questions will be handled as well, and not necessarily with all the answers. And also our work on creativity and critical thinking, which has become even more important in the age of AI. So thank you all, and see you very soon on other webinars.
Thanks very much.